Fire Mountain Aria, written and narrated by Jill Penrod. Part 2. The Aria. Chapter 12. Gianni put his hand on Trace's arm, closing his eyes. Something is strange about him. I felt something, and I feel it now too. Something coming from him. He made my head hurt. Do you think he's dangerous? I asked. Gianni looked at the man and placed a hand on his chest, his brow furrowed. No, but I think he's in danger. Something isn't right. He's bleeding. I leaned forward to see, and the man's head was bleeding. His nose also bled, and he was shaking. Maybe from the cold, maybe from something else. He wasn't conscious, and as Gianni moved his arms and prepared to lift him, the man looked like he had no plans to regain consciousness any time soon. He was solidly out. Can you carry him? I asked. We need to get him off the ice before he freezes. I know you're strong enough, but it's slick. We can stick to the land, Gianni said. He's not Fleota. Too big for Fleota. That and the fact that he just appeared in a flash. That's not normal for Fleota either, I said. Gianni laughed. True. It's not common for Scavari either. He must be real, because he's heavy. Where are we taking him? I asked. Your Ispatur, Gianni said. He stopped walking. Is that okay? I should have asked. I figured it was out of the way, and I'm not sure we want anyone to know he's here. Not until we have answers. So you do think he's dangerous? Gianni shook his head. No, I felt something. Surprise? Fear? It wasn't malevolent. I feel like he didn't come to hurt us. He's not dressed right to be here, I said. His poor feet. Yes, Gianni said. This is something very strange and wrong. I'll stay with you until we know he won't hurt you. I hadn't thought about him bringing danger to my home, mostly because this situation was so unknown. I didn't know what thoughts to have. Gianni had been the first stranger ever to enter my home. Everyone else I'd known all my life. Now there was another, and this one was much, much stranger than Gianni. I should have felt fear, I supposed, but instead I wanted answers. Since I'd met Gianni, I'd felt something from him, something deeper than I felt around others. I thought it had to do with friendship. This man felt similar. Something about both Gianni and Trace felt strange, even powerful. I wanted to understand why. Trace shifted and moaned, and Gianni paused and looked into his face. I don't like the blood, he said, and he's shaking harder. We need to hurry. I knew he said it more to himself than me, because I was following his pace. He did speed up, and soon I opened the door to the Ispatur and let us in. Amma, sitting beneath a pile of blankets in her favorite chair, simply stared at us. Who is it? She asked. What happened? Then she leaned forward, and her eyes widened. I assumed she'd realized this man wasn't Fleota, and his coloring wasn't Scavari, and that made him completely unknown. I could imagine how much worse her shock would be when we told her he'd arrived in a flash of light. Where can I put him? Gianni asked, his voice wheezing. The man was not small, and I was sure carrying him was getting difficult. Here, I said, straightening my own mat and blankets, which I'd left next to the Height Scava pit. Gianni lay Trace down, and I covered him in a blanket. Because he was shaking so hard, I added another. He's bleeding, Gianni said. He sat back on his heels and looked at the man. And shaking. Is that cold? I feel like it's more than cold. Warm tea will help, Amma said, and she pushed the blankets off her lap and went to the small kitchen to make tea. I placed my hand on Trace's head, noting his damp hair. I wasn't sure if he'd gotten wet on the ice or if he was sweating. Neither seemed possible in the cold. Yes, Gianni said, we need to help him, but I don't even know what's wrong. Gianni's panic surprised me. I tucked the blanket around Trace's shoulders and then went for the first aid supplies. We needed to clean his head and check for other injury. He'd come in a flash, but I thought I'd heard a thump, so maybe he'd fallen. If so, we needed to make sure he wasn't suffering broken bones. "Amma, add Skrylos to the tea," I said, hoping we could ease both pain and fear that might plague him. "I don't know what that is," Gianni said. "It's an herb we use to calm pain and nerves," I said. "I figure he might experience both when he wakes up." "I hope he wakes up," Gianni said. He shifted his weight and simply sat on the floor, placing his hand on Trace's arm and closing his eyes. "Can you still feel it? Something?" "Yes, a variation on something I feel from you, too," I said. "Wait," Gianni said. "I feel something from you, too, but I thought it was attraction? I didn't know. I liked how it felt." "I thought it was friendship," I said, not sure what to do with the idea that G would feel attraction for me. To change the subject, I leaned forward and studied the man. Trace. What a strange name. He was pale like me. In fact, a Scavari might look at him and think he was Fleota. The only reason I knew he wasn't was that I knew every Fleota in Montefallo, and this man wasn't one of them. He had light hair, and while he was wider than most Fleota, well-muscled, his face was shaped like ours, not as angular as the Scavari. A long gash on his forehead bled into his hair and now his eyes, and I grabbed a rag from the scrap bag and held it over the injury. This elicited a shift and a groan from him, which I took to be a good sign. He was coming out of his unconsciousness. "What?" Trace hissed quietly. He whimpered once, one hand going to his head, and Gianni carefully intercepted the hand before the man could touch the injury. "Easy," Gianni said. "We've got you, Trace. It will be okay. Just rest easy." With another whimper, he settled, and I suspected he'd slid back into unconsciousness. Gianni leaned back and stared at him. "There is not one good explanation for this man," he said, his eyes wide. "I can't think of anything that might bring a stranger to Montefallo in a flash of light." "A flash of light?" Amma asked. She stared at us from the small kitchen area, her eyes as wide as Gianni's. "He came in a flash of light?" "Does that mean something to you?" I asked. "No," Amma said quickly. I wasn't sure I believed her. "So he's not Scavari?" "No," Gianni said. "He looks more Fleota." "He's not Fleota," I said. "At least he's not one of ours." "So he's not from the mountain," Gianni said. He shrugged. "Of course he's not from the mountain. We generally don't travel in flashes of light, and if we did, we'd know to wear warmer clothes and shoes." Trace was still shivering, so I grabbed a pair of thick socks for his icy toes and placed yet another blanket over him. Like Gianni, I wasn't convinced the shivering had to do with cold, but it made me feel better to try to help him, even if I was doing it wrong. "I don't know what to do now," Gianni said quietly. "I'm not good at waiting, and I hate mysteries." I had to smile at his admission. "I'd say I'm the same," I said. I leaned forward and touched the skin near Trace's gash. "This might need stitched." "Can you do that?" Gianni asked. "It's not something I've ever done." "Amma can do it," I said. "She stitches very well. The tea will calm him for that, too, except he can't drink it while he's asleep." "I think he'll hurt when he wakes up," Gianni said, touching a bruise on Trace's cheek. "We should look for other injuries. I'll do that." He gave me a look, and I turned around while Gianni lifted the man's shirt and poked and prodded. I heard a stifled groan, and then Gianni told me I could turn back. "What did you find?" "Bruise on his hip. I don't recognize this clothing. It's strange. Too soft." I lifted the blanket and nodded. Yes, the trousers were loose and soft, made of something I didn't recognize. The shirt wasn't as soft, a thinner fabric that I also didn't recognize. I didn't understand why he wasn't dressed for the weather. Where had he come from that he didn't know his destination would be cold? And would these clothes hold up to any weather? He seemed to be dressed for sleeping, perhaps, not traveling outside. I have tea, Amma said, slowly walking back to the center of the room. She'd left the tea on the counter, so I knew she wasn't feeling steady. I didn't blame her, because the events of the morning had left me feeling a little unsteady, too. Amma, he needs stitches, I said, retrieving the tea and setting it on the low table near Amma's favorite chair. She slowly lowered to her knees on the floor and looked at his head. I need more light, she said with an apologetic shrug. And you can get the supplies? I gathered the supplies while Gianni broke 2 more Lettstoffer. He winced at the light, and I retrieved an extra pair of slotted glasses. He grinned when he was wearing them. This helps, he said. I'm surprised. Usually I don't need them in the house, I said, but Amma doesn't see as well now, so I know we need it very bright for her stitching. I mixed a cream for his face to dull the pain, and Gianni sat at Trace's side with his hands on his wrist to hold him if he fought. He'd shifted once or twice, but he didn't seem near to waking up. Amma had been stitching skin for many decades, and she moved quickly and precisely. It bothered me that the man didn't seem to notice. His breathing was slow and even, and his entire body seemed relaxed. I didn't want him so relaxed. I wanted him to wake up and explain himself. I wanted to understand why I felt something from him. What I felt with Gianni had come further into focus now, too. I had no words to describe it, just a general feeling that Gianni and Trace were nearby, something I didn't feel from Amma. What would possibly connect Gianni and this man? Perhaps I would feel something from anyone who wasn't Fleota. I didn't remember coming into contact with Scavari before, not as close as I'd been to Gianni. When she finished, she patted Trace's cheek. I wish we knew his name, she said. We do, I said. He said it was Trace. That doesn't sound like a name to me. Not a Fleota name. Nor a Scavari name, Gianni said. He's young, she said. No older than the 2 of you. He's dressed like he doesn't mean to be here. I wonder if someone hurt him, took him from his home. I remember stories of the battles, the wars that led us to Montefallo. Sometimes bad men came right to the door and hurt people, killed people. There was no safety anywhere. Do you know what started the wars? Gianni asked. What was the fight about? Power, I suppose, Amma said. I'm not sure I was ever told. Land, perhaps? I just know it had to be bad to send seafaring Fleota to a volcanic lake. And bad enough that our ancestors doubted that anyone survived, I said. I hope he wasn't fleeing something like that. Fleeing, by appearing in a flash of light, is something... Gianni shook his head and ran his hand through his hair. It means nothing, and yet here he is. Trace still shook, and I put yet another blanket over him. Then I rested my hand on his face, and he shifted again, turning his cheek into my hand. He knows you're here, Gianni said. I think. Is he shaking less, just because you're touching him? I put my other hand on his chest, and Amma suggested I touch his skin, so I slid my hand beneath the edge of his shirt. And yes, the shaking seemed to slow. You said you feel something, Amma said, shaking her head. Both of you? Yes, Gianni said. Something hurt my head before he appeared, and I felt something, like fear or surprise. From him? Amma asked. From Kaya? I don't know, Gianni said. Maybe just from myself. Put your hands on him too, Amma said. If he's afraid, perhaps it will help. If he feels you the way you feel him, I don't know. Put your hands on him too. Gianni slid his hand beneath the blanket and gripped the man's arm, and for a long while we sat that way, watching him calm, the shaking slowing and finally stopping. Trace gave a small sigh and shifted, again pressing his face more firmly against my hand, and I felt he had finally fallen into a normal sleep. He feels better, Gianni said. He frowned. Doesn't he? How would I know this? What is this man? I think he feels better, I said. I think he's asleep now. "Can we move?" Gianni asked. "My arm is asleep." I laughed. "I think you can move. You should have said something." "It felt right," he said, not quite looking at me. "To help. Whatever he is, he was afraid. Did you feel that?" "Yes," I said. "He was cold, but I think the shaking was fear." "And pain, maybe," Gianni said. "Fidelio would laugh at me. He says I keep myself too distant. He'd find it amusing that I sat with my hands on a stranger for so long to calm him." "I never felt like you were distant," I said to him, and that won me a smile. "With you, I don't have to be," he said with a shrug. "Now what?" "Now he sleeps," Amma said. "We can eat. Eating wastes time. How long, Kaya? How many days of dim note are left? I've lost track this year." "Maybe 3 more days," I said. "The center of the sky is light. The sun is coming back." Amma nodded. "It seemed long this year." "Because I was gone so much," I said, feeling guilty. "I'm sorry." "No," Amma said. "No, that was good. It didn't seem as long to you, did it?" "No," I said, smiling at Gianni, who was staring at the sleeping man. "No, if every dim note was like this, it would be my favorite time of year." She smiled again, and I feared she would say something embarrassing about Gianni and me, but she held her tongue and asked us to help her make food. We didn't rush to cook, nor did we rush to eat, and Trace continued to sleep. I felt that his head ached because mine almost ached, like I was feeling the ghost of his feelings. Gianni said the same. "I need to move Letzstoffer in the 5th fork," Gianni said, running his hand through his dark curls. "But I can't leave you with him. I'm not sure he's safe." I didn't have answers, and Gianni sat beside Trace and once again placed his hand on him. First he touched his face, and then he placed a hand on his neck, and finally he slid his hand beneath the blanket to his arm. He looked up at me, shaking his head. "Everything is different," he said quietly. "Do you feel that? Today, everything is different." "Yes," I said. "He needs to wake up and tell us why it's different. Maybe it's good." "Change of this magnitude is never good," Gianni said quietly. "Wait." I felt it too, that something was changing in Trace's sleep. His eyes fluttered and opened, and he squinted. "So bright," he muttered, closing his eyes again. Gianni looked at me in surprise, and I slid yet another set of slotted glasses over Trace's face. Was he like us? How could that be? "Trace," Gianni said cautiously, "are you well? Can we help?" Those weren't the first questions I'd have asked, and I was ashamed at that realization. I wanted to know his origin and why he was here. But his pain seemed to call to Gianni more than it did to me. Then Gianni put his fingers on his own forehead, and I realized he felt this man more strongly than I did. I knew Trace was in pain, but I suspected Gianni actually felt the pain with him. "The panel," he said, shifting and stretching his arms. His eyes fluttered open and closed like they weren't sure how to function. "Where's the panel?" "We don't know what that is," Gianni said. "This big," the man said, sliding the blanket lower so his hands showed. He held his fingers in a rectangle not much larger than the size of his palm. "Woven of reeds. It's important. Wait, I don't understand." "Well, that's disappointing," Gianni said with a smile, showing his charm. "We have no answers and hoped you'd give us some." "You're singers," he said. He shifted and looked at Amma, who was bundled in her chair again. "But not her. Do you have panels? Echo will worry." Gianni looked at me, and I shrugged. Perhaps he dropped something and we didn't see it. We were focused on getting him home. Gianni nodded. "We can look." "What do you mean we're singers? Can't everyone sing? Where you come from, are some silent?" The man's eyes drifted closed again, and I felt the pain in his head lessen. Gianni's shoulders relaxed. You feel his pain, I said. You don't? Gianni asked. No, I know he hurts. I feel that he's in pain, but I don't feel it. I mostly do, Gianni said, like an echo of pain. It hurts, but I know it hurts him more. Do you think he brought something we missed? It's the first thing that came to his mind, I said. It must be important. I think he's not a danger, Gianni said. I can go look. I'm faster, I said. I'll look, and you watch out for him. But do you need to go home? No, Gianni said firmly. I need to be here. As the leader, I need to understand this man. That was probably true, but I suspected it wasn't the actual reason he wouldn't leave. He was curious, and if he felt Trace's pain and feelings, I could understand him wanting answers. We hadn't been far from the ISPA tour when Trace had flashed into our lives, and I was relieved to find a small mat of reeds on the ice, just like he'd said. I looked at the mat a long time, turning it over in my hands. It appeared to be made of old, dried Lettstoffer. Did that mean he came from nearby, or that our reeds grew more widely than we knew? Stories said the discovery had been made after we'd all arrived at Montefollo, and nobody was sure the reeds grew elsewhere. When I returned, Gianni was pacing, and Amma was staring at him. Trace was still asleep on my mat, blankets piled over him. Has something happened? I asked. No, Gianni stopped pacing. You found it? I held out the mat, and he looked at it a long time. Is it Lettstoffer? How is this important? Old Lettstoffer in a mat? I don't understand. Amma held out her hand, and Gianni gave it to her. She studied the mat for a long time. I'm not sure it's our reeds, she said. Look at the holes. I think it's an instrument, like Papa Olsen's flute. Gianni took the panel back and frowned at it. So he's a musician? When faced with strangers, his head filled with agony, he worries about his musical instrument? Musicians can be very single-minded, Amma said with a shrug. Gianni turned, and Trace opened his eyes again. One hand went to his head, and he hissed in pain. What did I do? He whispered. He looked at Gianni, then at Amma and me, his eyes wide. So I really did feel you. The reef is populated. How many of you are there? Gianni sat on the floor at the man's side. What do you mean? Here in the reef. How many people are in the reef? Trace asked. I don't know. Gianni looked up at me. A reef? The man's eyes widened. Ah, so where am I? Montefollo, I said, sitting at Gianni's side. A dead volcano. Well, we hope it's dead. We live on the lake and the caverns of Montefollo. Where do you think you are? Trace gave a small smile. So you don't know. A dead volcano. How very strange. He shifted and winced, his pain growing. Gianni squinted, apparently picking up on the pain more than I did. I'm Gianni, leader of the Scavari. This is Kaya of the Fleota, and Amma. We don't understand why you're here, or how, or anything, I think. We found your mat. Thank you, the man said. He held out his hand, and Gianni placed the panel in his palm. The man gently stroked the old mat like it was his most prized possession. I'm Trace. Trace Odell. That's my name. You told us, I said. You told us some of your name. You hurt. Yes, Trace said. My head. I tore my focus. Badly. I don't know how to fix it. I don't understand. I didn't play the jump. I shouldn't be here. I felt something from... Did one of you jump me here? I felt something from here. Something. Trace cringed and whimpered, his face white. Closing his eyes, he relaxed, again sliding away from us. Gianni put his hand on Trace's hand and slid the reed mat to one side. perhaps to protect it. None of that meant anything, Gianni said. I thought he would have answers. He will, I said, when he stops hurting. I understand that his head hurts, Gianni said. I feel that. But the rest, jump, focus, tearing a focus. Most of his words are our tongue, but maybe his tongue isn't entirely ours. What if we can never speak to him? He said we didn't know, I said. We told him of our home, and he said we didn't know. Perhaps the theory is true, that we're the only ones left. There are many things about our world we don't know, Gianni said. He must think us foolish to live on this volcano and never poke our heads out to see the world around us. I wondered if it was that simple. I had the feeling nothing about this man's arrival would turn out to be simple.